welcome to the show where we share the stories of the many who intersect with our healthcare system but are rarely heard from. My name is Kevin Poe, founder and editor of Kevin MD. Rate and review the show at kevinmd.com/rate. Subscribe at kevinmd.com/follow. Today on the show, we have Althea Halchuck. She is a patient advocate. Her Kevin MD article is titled A Bad Death, The Importance of Truth-Telling at End of Life. Althea, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
We'll get into the article in a little bit, but first off, can you share your story and journey to where you are today?
Sure. As I said before, I grew up in New England, but I moved to California like 20 years ago, really. And I started volunteering at Hospice at that time. And it was a totally different from what I was doing. And in that process, I became a mediator at Superior Court in LA, and I went to law school to become a better mediator. But while I was there, I had an epiphany that maybe I should be doing some other kind of law. And I have an executive juris doctor, which meant that I'm not a lawyer. I didn't sit for the bar. I couldn't sit for the bar, but I got a juris doctor in health law. And I did my internship at a pediatric hospice, a local hospice that I was already volunteering at. So I kept moving towards end of life type issues. And in 2016, I got my thanatology certification, which allowed me to teach death education and work with the terminally ill. I mean, again, I'm moving towards the death realm. I don't have a problem talking about it with people. And I recently got certified as a facilitator in advanced care planning. So I offer workshops in the community to help people. I've had clinical ethics training. When I was in California, I was on 2 hospital ethics committees, and I learned a lot doing that. And again, a professional mediator that I help mediate now, elder and senior end-of-life issues with clinicians that, they may be having a problem coming to some kind of decision and they need a neutral third party. I started my business Ending Well Patient Advocacy in 2020 at the start of the pandemic, which wasn't a bad thing to do because most of my work is research, education, and I could do that from home. Mm-hmm. And I contracted with the Final Exit Network in 2021 to become their, it's called a surrogate consultant. And what I do is I help people that are having a problem in, say, an ICU where their wishes are not being followed or the surrogate is not being listened to. And I can give them their legal options. I don't give them really anything other than advice on what to say and who to talk to. But it's like another person that can help. And I can also go on a Zoom call with their provider and we can have like a conversation about what the treatment options are and what the pluses and minuses are. And so that's what I do for them. Plus they've made me a national speaker. I'm going to a conference in Atlanta to talk about Final Exit's guide to peace at the end of life. So it's opened up all of these avenues for me, and working with them was supposed to be part-time, but it's more of a full-time job. So all of the things that I've done in the past, like most people, fall under this umbrella of my business.
So you mentioned your work as a mediator and
Yep.
end-of-life care. Tell me, what are some of the common or typical issues that you deal with that require mediation?
If somebody, say, is at the end of life and they're incapacitated and they don't have an advance directive, then family members come in and they all have a different idea of what should be done. So that's one issue. Family disputes are one of the biggest problems in an ICU. People just don't get along for whatever reason, and now they're under all this stress and pressure, and really that kind of thing, you need somebody in the room that is objective and can help the parties see where their common areas are. Mostly the common area is do what's best for the patient. And sometimes it's a provider issue where they want something that like a feeding tube that the patient or the family says, no, she'd never want that. Like, no, we're not going to do that. And then so they have an impasse. And again, I can help come in and see, offer suggestions on maybe they want to try this or not try this, or what did the patient want, really what were her end of life goals, and we can go from there. So it's those kind of disputes where people are never at their best when someone's in an ICU, and really it's trying to bring calm and peace into the room.
Now, not everyone in end-of-life situations that I've been involved with has a mediator like yourself helping facilitate that conversation. How does one know whether to engage in a mediator like yourself when it comes to difficult end-of-life decisions?
Well, I'm more of a counselor and a conciliator than I am a mediator in those situations, because these people have to deal with each other after the patient is gone. In their ordinary life, sometimes it's early on, say in a diagnosis, and so they have to deal with the same doctor all the time. And really, if you're at a point where a decision isn't made and people are being pressured to make it, because time is of the essence a lot of time, most of the time. And is this person going to go into hospice, or is this person going to continue treatment? And that's a big fork in the road. And so if you're at that fork and you can't figure out what to do, and people are coming up with all different kinds of opinions, that may be a time to call someone in. Just, again, it's more conciliation. And I did a presentation about this, and it's trying to bring people together in a consensus. Mediation is really not that. And so if they can have a consensus about what to do, maybe try something for a while, and if that doesn't work, we give it a certain amount of time. And so I'm all about options and thinking outside the box, and really having people come together at the end so that the person in the bed isn't like surrounded by stress and discord. You want the person in the bed that's dying to have the most peaceful ending that they can have. And if people are fighting, that's not going to happen.
All right. And you talk more about end-of-life issues in your Kevin MD article. It's titled A Bad Death, The Importance of Truth-Telling at End of Life. Now, for those who didn't get a chance to read your article, can you just walk my audience through it and share the story of why you decided to write it?
Sure. I write a lot, and I write a lot of blogs, and sometimes a blog will just write itself. Mm-hmm. And I heard the person in this article is my sister-in-law, was my sister-in-law. And I learned about her health issues at the end of January. And through the next month, I contacted my adult nieces, who I'm very close to. And they told me that she was having all this testing. And after the test, she was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer in both lungs. And it had metastasized to her liver and bones. And someone in their healthcare team suggested, it was terminal, that's what they were told, it suggested hospice. And then the next thing I know, she's meeting with her oncologist. And I've been in this business long enough to know when that happens, that there goes palliative care and hospice. Mm-hmm. So they told me he was treating her. And I didn't want to push, but I'd send them little articles on when it's time to switch to hospice. And I knew she was really struggling and suffering, and she kept having to go to the hospital to have her lungs drained. She couldn't breathe. That's why she went to them in the first place. She couldn't breathe. So he told her that he had gotten, now this is a quote from my nieces, he told her with them in the room that he had gotten other patients through this with this miracle drug, and he could do the same thing for her. And he said that even though she wasn't eating and she was sick, in 6 to 8 weeks she should be feeling better and should be like almost her old self again. So the next thing I know, she's gone. And so at the wake and the funeral, I got all the details, and my nieces thought she should have been on hospice immediately, but they couldn't really tell their mother that. And they also told me that their mother really loved this doctor. She trusted him. Anything he said, she was going to believe. And that's what he said, 6 to 8 weeks. And she kept being hospitalized, and finally the last admission was actually in New Hampshire, a small rural hospital. The ER docs took one look at her and said her death was imminent and that she should be on hospice. And she died a day and a half later in the hospital on hospice. So to me, my nieces just was so outraged that he lied to her. He told her that she could get through this, and she never, the two things she wanted to do were to go to the beach one last time, because she loved the beach, and to hug her grandchild. She just had a grandchild 10 days before her diagnosis, and she never even got to meet that grandchild. So he took that away from her, and they were mad about it. So again, everybody had a bad death, my sister-in-law included, and they're going to have to live with that the rest of their lives. So thus the blog.
Now, obviously you can't speak for that physician, but in your opinion, why do you think that particular oncologist took that approach?
I think, as it happens, I think it starts really in medical school. A lot of times doctors, they cannot fail. Death is failure to them rather than a part of life. And so they have these great treatments that they think are going to extend life. But what they fail to see is that by extending her life, she missed out on precious time that she could have had with her family, tying up loose ends, hugging her grandkids, going to the beach. She didn't get any of that because this doctor didn't want to fail, and failure, death is failure. And so I think a lot of oncologists think that. I recently saw a webinar with an oncologist that was in Scottsdale. This was a national webinar through ADEC, which is the certification for thanatology. And he was wonderful. And he talked about that, like why, when it's time to stop, when it's time to just look at the patient and do what's best for the patient, not what's best in your bag of tricks that you think is going to help. I mean, she just trusted him, and that's the sad part. I wish I wanted to send this article to that oncologist and just let him know, because I don't think he knew about any of the after effects of what this drug did. She was sick the whole time. She never got any better. She never got a chance to have a good death.
Now, as far as you know, did the oncologist have advanced directives or end-of-life wishes conversations with your sister-in-law?
That's a good question. When I first learned she was ill and hospitalized and it didn't look good, there was really something serious going on, I was in New England at the time, and I offered to go see her and do an advanced directive. Her daughters didn't think she had one, but they said their father was her surrogate or proxy in Massachusetts, and that he knew what she wanted, and certainly dying the way she did is not what she wanted. So I don't know what conversations he had with her. I don't think they know. They weren't, they were both young mothers with jobs, so they weren't in the room all of the time. They just told me what they saw when they were in the room.
Now, if this scenario were to replay again, what would be a more ideal approach this oncologist could have taken?
Well, certainly what you just said. What are your end of life goals? What do you want to do? And I think it came down to really the prognosis. I don't think that was clear to her. I don't think, if he'd have said to her, I'm really sorry, this, he didn't cause it. You have cancer, just exactly what I said, it's everywhere. He did tell her that, but I don't think he said, and you really only have a month left or 2 months left or 3 at the outside if we do nothing. If we give you this magic potion, you may have 3 months and 5 days more, but you'll be sick the whole time and you will have no quality of life. If he'd have said it that way, I think she would have said, hospice, that's for me. I really want to spend the time in she had moved out of her house because my brother couldn't care for her at home. And so she was in an assisted living that she liked. She was only there for a couple of months, but she could have gone there and her grandkids could have come. She could have had it so much better ending if she had known. But I mean, he didn't have a crystal ball, but he knew. How much time was she really going to get with this drug? Not much.
We're talking to Althea Halchuck. She is a patient advocate. Her Kevin MD article is titled A Bad Death, The Importance of Truth-Telling at End of Life. Althea, for those clinicians listening to this podcast, what are some lessons, and I know you've mentioned this earlier, but what are some specific lessons that they can take away from your story?
I think one thing I do want to mention about what surprised me and how it relates to clinicians is that I had 4,000 shares of that article. And I've written other articles on Kevin MD where I maybe had 100 or 25. I mean, and that's okay, but 4,000 in probably 2 weeks. And I had so many people email me on LinkedIn, on Facebook about how they experienced the same thing. And not just from family members, from nurses in ICUs, oncology people that deal with this day in and day out. And so I heard about one bad death after another. And I think if clinicians would just tell the honest truth about the prognosis, about a timeline, nobody's asking for an exact timeline, but I think they really want to know, do I have a month, doc? Am I going to see the next Christmas? I mean, that kind of thing. I think they can do a prognosis within some sort of time frame. And don't offer treatment options that are going to make the patient sicker, that don't have a prayer of working, or that they're a poor trade-off just to gain a week or a month. Really, let the patient know what they're up against and be honest about it.
And my final question, what are some of your take-home messages that you want to leave with the Kevin MD audience?
Utilize palliative care and hospice sooner rather than later. And it's such underutilized. It's pretty much free under Medicare. And I think people will just have a better quality end of life. And it gives them that precious time where everything's on the table. They can have last conversations. They can ask for forgiveness. They can forgive other people. Janet never got to do any of those things. And I think if people, if they were referred to hospice and palliative care and had that kind of experience, patients and families would definitely experience a better death.
Althea, thank you so much for sharing your story, time, and insight. And thanks again for being on the show.
Thank you, Kevin. Been a pleasure.